He fired her on a Tuesday. Didn't even look at her name on the paperwork. She walked out into the rain, pregnant, broke, and invisible. 3 months later, a DNA test landed on his desk, and the woman he threw away turned out to be the one person on this earth he couldn't afford to lose. The security guard didn't look at her. That was the part that stayed. Not the termination letter, not the HR woman's rehearsed voice reading the severance terms like a grocery list, not even the way her badge was deactivated before she'd finished packing. It was the guard. Mid-50s, wedding ring, coffee breath. He held the side door open with one arm and stared at a point somewhere above her head, like she was furniture being moved out. Like she wasn't a person carrying a cardboard box full of 4 years of showing up. Lindsey Perez stepped into the November rain. Boston in late fall doesn't ease you into winter. It just hits. The kind of cold, fine rain that gets under your collar and stays there, that turns the parking lot into something slick and grey and miserable. She stood on the bottom step of St. Clair Memorial Hospital's east exit, the staff entrance, the one without the awning, and let the water collect on the tops of her shoes. Cheap flats. The sole on the left one was starting to separate. Inside the box, her stethoscope, the one with her initials engraved on the bell. A mug she'd bought herself because nobody else was going to. 2 photos taped to the inside. One of her mother, faded at the edges, and one of the cardiology team at last year's holiday party. Her name badge sat on top. She used to polish it with her sleeve every morning before clocking in. Stupid habit. She did it anyway. Through the glass door, still open, because the guard hadn't bothered to close it, she could see Peter Strahm, back turned, adjusting his collar with one hand, while the other held a phone to his ear. Already talking numbers, restructuring, quarterly targets. The overhead light caught his watch, and for a second, the reflection flared like a camera flash. He didn't know her name. She was sure of that. 4 years on his payroll, and he'd signed her termination without looking at the line where it said who she was. Lindsey shifted the box to her hip. The cardboard was getting soft from the rain. She thought about going back inside, demanding a meeting, telling someone, anyone, that she was 6 weeks pregnant, that she'd given this place everything, that the night shift on the cardiac ward was already short-staffed, and they were going to regret this. But the thought dissolved before it fully formed, the way thoughts do when you already know the answer. Nobody was going to fight for her. Nobody ever had. She walked to the T station on Boylston. The green line was delayed. Track maintenance, the automated voice said, like that explained anything. She stood on the platform with her box and her wet shoes and a pregnancy she'd known about for 11 days. And she waited. 3 floors above the east exit, in a windowless server room that smelled like recycled air and old carpet, a database query had just finished running. The St. Clair Cardiac Genetics Initiative, John Kramer's pet project, funded 2 years before his death, and still chugging along on grant money and institutional inertia. Collected voluntary DNA samples from hospital staff. The idea was simple. Build a genetic database to study hereditary markers for cardiac disease. Hundreds of employees had swabbed their cheeks, dropped the vials in the collection box outside the cafeteria, and never thought about it again. Lindsey had done hers on a Tuesday 2 years ago. Lunch break. She'd been eating a granola bar over the sink in the break room when a research assistant handed her the kit. She did it because saying no felt like more effort than saying yes. John Kramer's sample was in the database too. Founder's privilege, first donor. His genetic profile sat in the system like a ghost nobody had thought to delete. The algorithm didn't care about names or histories or who owned what. It just ran its comparisons, flagged its matches, and generated its reports. On the afternoon, Lindsey Perez was escorted out of the building with a cardboard box. The system flagged a result it had never flagged before. Parental match, first-degree relative, confidence, 97%. The report sat in Dr. Morgan's queue for 3 days before she opened it. When she did, she read it twice, closed her laptop, and stared at the wall for a long time. Peter Strahm ate dinner alone that night. He ate dinner alone most nights. The penthouse on Beacon Hill had been his father's before it was his. High ceilings, hardwood floors that creaked in all the wrong places, a kitchen with a 6-burner stove nobody had ever used for actual cooking. The fridge held leftovers from a restaurant delivery, a bottle of sparkling water, and 3 kinds of mustard that had been there since the previous tenant, which was his father. He sat at the dining table, a 12-seater walnut, ridiculous for one person, and ate reheated pad thai from a container while scrolling through quarterly reports on his laptop. The heating system ticked. The radiator in the hallway hissed and clanked the way it always did around 7, like something was alive in the pipes. Peter had called maintenance twice. They'd fixed nothing, 37 years old. CEO of Strahm Health Group, 4 hospitals, 2 urgent care networks, a research wing named after a dead man. On paper, Peter was the kind of success story that got profiled in Forbes and invited to panels where people in expensive shoes talked about the future of American healthcare. In person, he was a guy eating cold noodles in a too-big apartment, with a crease in his shirt he hadn't noticed and a phone full of contacts he never called. His father, John Kramer, had built the empire. Brick by brick, grant by grant, handshake by handshake. Built St. Clair Memorial from a bankrupt community clinic into one of the top cardiac centers on the East Coast. Died at 61. Massive coronary. The kind of irony that writes itself. The man who built a heart hospital, killed by his own heart. Peter was 24 when it happened. The funeral was at Trinity Church in Copley Square, and it was packed. Senators, hospital board members, donors whose names were on buildings. Peter stood in the front pew in a black suit that didn't quite fit in the shoulders and watched strangers cry over a man he'd barely known. That was the day his mother told him. Tracy Rigg, Beacon Hill, born and raised, Wellesley educated, a woman who could smile at a charity gala and gut you in a boardroom without changing expression. She'd pulled Peter aside during the reception, people milling around with champagne and those little sandwiches nobody actually eats, and said it like she was reporting a change in the weather. Your father had an affair, Peter. A long one, a woman, lower class. It lasted years. She smoothed the lapel of his jacket. She almost destroyed everything he built. I made sure she didn't. That was it. No name, no details, no confirmation of whether there'd been a child. Just the grenade, tossed into his hands, and Tracy walking away to accept condolences from the Dean of Harvard Medical. Peter stood there holding his champagne, 24 years old, and felt the ground crack under his feet. He never asked his mother about it again, and in the 13 years since, he'd built his life around making sure nobody could crack his ground a second time. The pad thai was cold. He didn't bother reheating it. His phone buzzed, a text from his assistant about tomorrow's board meeting. He typed "confirmed" and set the phone face down on the table. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the neighborhood was doing its quiet, expensive thing. Streetlights on wet cobblestone, town cars idling, the distant sound of someone's dog being walked. Peter closed the laptop. The screen went dark, and for a moment, his reflection stared back at him, tired, sharp-jawed, hollow around the eyes. He left the leftovers on the table and went to his father's study, sat in the chair, looked at the family photo on the desk, John, Tracy, Peter at 12, everyone smiling. Peter's smile looked like it had been borrowed from someone else. The room smelled like old leather and dust. He sat there until his phone died, and then he sat there a little longer. Now, I want you to think about something for a second. 2 people, same city, same blood running through their veins. One of them just lost the only job that kept her life together. The other one signed the paper that took it away. And neither one of them, not one, has any idea what's about to happen. That's the thing about the truth. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just shows up. And when it does, it doesn't knock. 3 months passed. Lindsey found work at a community clinic in Roxbury, the kind of place that operated on duct tape and stubbornness. The waiting room had plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a TV mounted to the wall playing daytime talk shows on mute, and a vending machine in the corner that only took exact change and hadn't had Doritos since October. The fluorescent lights buzzed. One in the hallway had been flickering for weeks. Nobody fixed it. She made half what she'd made at St. Clair. Didn't matter. Or it mattered, but she'd gotten good at telling herself it didn't. The belly was showing now. Not dramatically, not in your face, but enough that she'd switched to scrubs a size up and started getting looks from the other nurses. Nobody asked. She didn't volunteer. February in Boston felt personal. The cold didn't just arrive. It moved in. It settled into the walls, the pipes, the space between your coat and your skin. Lindsey's apartment in Dorchester was a third-floor walk-up on a street where the potholes had potholes, and the radiator worked on what she'd started calling a suggestion basis. Some nights it kicked on at 2 a.m. and woke her up hissing. Some nights it didn't kick on at all, and she'd sleep in a hoodie with 2 blankets and her coat draped over her feet. She was doing okay. That was the word she used when her aunt called once a month from Worcester. "I'm okay, Aunt Diane. Yeah, everything's fine." Aunt Diane never pushed, never had. The conversation lasted 4 minutes, tops, and when Lindsey hung up, she'd sit there for a second, phone still warm in her hand, waiting for something. She didn't know what. Eric Matthews had texted twice since the breakup. The first one, 3 weeks after. "Hey, hope you're doing well." She'd stared at it for 10 minutes and then deleted the thread. The second one came in January. "Can we talk?" She didn't respond to that one either. 4 years. 4 years of his toothbrush next to hers, of falling asleep to the sound of his breathing, of planning a future that he dismantled in 6 lines of text. "It's not the right time for me." Like she was a seasonal subscription he'd decided to cancel. He didn't know about the baby. She intended to keep it that way. The clinic kept her busy, at least. That was something. 12-hour shifts, sometimes 14, on her feet until her ankles swelled and her lower back felt like someone had taken a crowbar to it. The patients at the Roxbury Clinic weren't the same as St. Clair's. No insurance executives waiting for their annual stress tests. No Beacon Hill wives getting second opinions on blood work they didn't understand. Here it was different. The uninsured, the underinsured. The people who waited until something was really wrong before showing up, because a doctor visit meant choosing between their health and their electric bill. Lindsey understood those choices. She'd made them herself. There was a kid, 8, maybe 9, who came in every 2 weeks with his grandmother. Asthma. The grandmother always brought a Ziploc bag full of expired inhalers she'd collected from neighbors, trying to piece together enough medication to keep the kid breathing. Lindsey never said anything about the expired dates. She just made sure he left with a working prescription and a follow-up appointment he'd probably miss. She ate lunch alone most days. The break room had a microwave that smelled like burnt popcorn no matter what you put in it, a table with a wobbly leg, and a window that faced the parking lot. She'd sit with her Tupperware, rice and whatever vegetable had been on sale, and scroll through her phone without reading anything. Sometimes she'd catch herself opening the text thread with Eric, even though she'd deleted his messages. The thread was empty now, just his name at the top. She'd stare at it, then close the app, then open it again 5 minutes later. Pathetic. She knew it was pathetic. She did it anyway. At night in the apartment, she'd lie on the couch with her hand on her belly and feel the small, fluttering movements that had started 2 weeks ago. Not kicks yet, more like bubbles. Like someone tapping from the inside, very gently, just to say, "I'm here." She'd close her eyes and try to picture it. A baby. A real, actual baby. In this apartment, with the leaky faucet and the ceiling stain she kept meaning to report, and the neighbor who played bass guitar at 11 p.m. every Thursday. She was terrified. Not of the labor, not of the diapers and the sleepless nights. She'd worked enough shifts to know she could function on nothing. She was terrified of the quiet, the moments between the feeding and the crying, when it would be just her and a small human who depended on her for everything and no one else in the room. No partner, no mother to call, no one to say, "You're doing fine." She was terrified of becoming exactly what she'd always been, alone taking care of someone, with nobody to take care of her. The phone rang on a Tuesday, late afternoon, the kind of grey light that made everything look like a photograph someone had drained the color from. Lindsey was charting at the nurse's station, her back aching from 12 hours on her feet, her coffee cold, her ponytail coming loose on one side. St. Clair Memorial. That was the caller ID. She almost let it ring out. Almost. But something, muscle memory maybe, or the stubborn part of her that couldn't ignore a hospital number, made her pick up. "Ms. Perez, this is Dr. Morgan. I'm the chief of the genetics lab at St. Clair." Lindsey straightened in her chair. "I don't work there anymore." "I know." A pause. The kind of pause that has weight to it. "This isn't about employment. There's a result from the cardiac genetics program. The one you participated in. A DNA match we weren't expecting. Another pause. I think you need to see this in person. What kind of match? I'd rather not discuss it over the phone, Ms. Perez. Can you come to the hospital this week? Lindsey looked at the flickering fluorescent in the hallway. The vending machine hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a kid was crying. Thursday, she said. I can do Thursday. She went on a day when the snow was thick enough to make the sidewalks treacherous and thin enough to melt into grey slush by noon. She entered through the back, the loading dock entrance, the one deliveries used. She told herself it was because it was closer to the genetics lab. It wasn't. It was because walking through the front doors of a place that had thrown her out felt like something she wasn't ready for. Dr. Morgan was younger than she expected. Late 30s, dark hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She met Lindsey in a windowless room in the basement level. Fluorescent lights, a table, 2 chairs, a box of tissues that looked like it had been placed there with intention. The room smelled like cleaning solution and recycled air. Thank you for coming. Morgan sat across from her, placed a manila envelope on the table, didn't open it. What I'm about to show you is confidential, so I need you to understand that this result was generated by our automated system. I didn't go looking for it. It came up in a routine database cross-reference. Lindsey's hands were in her lap. She pressed her thumbs together. Your DNA, Morgan said carefully, shows a direct parental match with John Kramer's profile. He was the founder of this hospital. His genetic data was the first entered into our cardiac research database. She paused, let the words settle. The markers are definitive, Ms. Perez. John Kramer was your biological father. The tissue box sat untouched. The room felt smaller than before. Lindsey opened the envelope, read the report, read it again. The numbers, the confidence intervals, the highlighted sections. Parental match, first degree. She closed the envelope and set it on the table. A full minute passed, maybe longer. Somewhere above them, footsteps crossed a hallway and faded. Does he know? Lindsey asked. Her voice was steady, steadier than she felt. His son. Does Peter Strahm know? Morgan shook her head. Not yet. But he's the CEO of this hospital. He'll be informed. Lindsey looked at the envelope, at the table, at the tissue box she hadn't touched. John Kramer, she said. Not a question, a fact she was trying to fit into a life that had never had room for it. Your father, Morgan said quietly. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that has texture. Lindsey picked up the envelope, put it in her bag, and stood. Thank you, she said. She wasn't sure what she was thanking her for. She walked back through the loading dock, past the dumpsters and the parked ambulance, and the maintenance guy smoking a cigarette by the generator. The snow was falling again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. The clinic probably asking about tomorrow's schedule. She didn't check. She walked 3 blocks to the T station, stood on the platform, and waited for the red line. The train came. She got on. Found a seat next to a woman with grocery bags and a teenager with headphones so loud she could hear the bass line. She held the envelope in her lap the whole ride home. Didn't open it again. Didn't need to. The numbers were already burned into her memory like a scar she didn't ask for. The train rattled through the tunnel. The lights flickered once, twice, then held. Here's what gets me about this part. She spent her whole life wondering why she wasn't enough, why her father left, why Eric left, why the hospital let her go without blinking. And now, sitting on a red line train with a piece of paper that says she's the daughter of the man who built that hospital, she's still not sure she's enough. That's what growing up without love does to a person. It doesn't make you doubt other people. It makes you doubt yourself. And no DNA test in the world fixes that. Dr. Morgan called Peter Strahm under the pretense of an internal audit on the genetics program. Standard language, bureaucratic tone, a meeting request any CEO would accept without thinking twice. She scheduled it for a Friday afternoon at 4, late enough that most of the administrative floor had cleared out, early enough that it wouldn't look suspicious. Peter walked in expecting spreadsheets. He found Lindsey. She was sitting in the same basement room, same chair, same cold light. Different clothes, a sweater that had seen better years, her coat draped over the back of the chair. the pregnancy visible now under the fabric. She didn't stand when he entered, just looked at him with those grey-green eyes and waited. Peter stopped in the doorway. His jaw tightened. The expression on his face wasn't anger. Not yet. It was controlled blankness, the mask that people who run things learn to wear when they don't know what's happening. A mask made of nothing. "What is this?" "Sit down, Mr. Strahm," Morgan said from the corner. She was standing near a filing cabinet, holding a second copy of the report. "I asked what this is." "I'm not here about the job," Lindsey said. Flat, direct, no warmth, no hostility. "Sit down." He sat, not because she told him to, because his legs made the decision before his brain caught up. Morgan placed the envelope in front of him. Explained the database, the cross-reference, the match. Used words like genetic markers and confidence interval and parental lineage. Peter read the report the way he read everything, once fast, once slow, once with his finger tracking the data points. His hands didn't shake, his face didn't change, but he went quiet. And Peter Strahm was never quiet. The silence lasted long enough that Lindsey started counting the ticks of the ventilation system. 4, 7, 11. "This doesn't change anything," he said finally. Low, controlled. The voice of a man holding something down with both hands. Lindsey almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was exactly what she'd expected him to say, and hearing it still felt like a door slamming. Morgan excused herself, said she'd give them a moment. The door clicked shut and they were alone with the report and the tissue box that nobody was going to touch. "I'm not here for money," Lindsey said. "Then what?" "I want to know why nobody came looking for me." Peter stared at the report, then at her, then at the wall behind her. The vein in his temple was doing something. A small pulse, barely visible. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you'd spent years reading vital signs on monitors. "I didn't know you existed," he said. "Somebody did." He didn't answer that. He folded the report, creased it along the center with his thumbnail, precise, deliberate the way he did everything, and slid it back across the table. "My lawyers will need to verify this independently." "Fine. And this stays between us until they do." "Fine." He stood, buttoned his jacket, looked at her one more time, a look that lasted maybe 2 seconds, but carried something heavy behind it, something he wasn't ready to name, and walked out. Lindsey sat there for another 5 minutes after he left. The ventilation hummed. She pulled her coat on, zipped it over her belly, and took the tea home. The lawyers verified it in 9 days. Art Blank, estate attorney for the Kramer Family Trust, a man who looked like he'd been wearing the same style of suit since 1994, confirmed that Lindsey Perez had a legitimate legal claim as John Kramer's biological daughter. Inheritance rights, trust access, the whole thing. The meetings started. Not warm ones, transactional, careful, full of legal language and people who got paid by the hour. Lindsey sat on one side of the table with a pro bono attorney who'd taken her case after reading about it through a colleague. Peter sat on the other side with Art Blank and 2 associates who never took off their blazers. But the meetings changed, slowly. The way ice melts, you don't see it happening. But the shape is different when you look again. The conference room at Art Blank's office was on the 14th floor of a building on State Street, the kind of place with too much mahogany and not enough natural light. They'd meet on Wednesdays at 3. By the 4th week, the lawyers had started leaving early. The broad strokes were settled, and the details could wait, and Peter and Lindsey would end up in the silence that was left, neither one in a hurry to leave. It was during one of those silences that Peter said, without looking up from the document he wasn't reading, he used to do that, tap his fingers on the table like that. Lindsey froze. She'd been drumming her fingers on the edge of the conference table, index, middle, ring pinky, reverse, once without realizing it, a nervous habit, something she'd done since she was a kid. "Your father," Peter said, "he did the exact same thing, same fingers, same order." She pulled her hand into her lap. He went back to pretending to read. 2 weeks later they were in a restaurant. Not a fancy one, a Thai place in the South End that Peter's assistant had picked because it was equidistant from both their neighborhoods. Neutral territory. The tables were too close together, the music was too loud, and the waiter kept coming back to ask if they wanted more water. "You order coffee 3 times before you actually drink it," Lindsey said. Peter looked up from his menu. "What? Every time? You order it, you stir it, you move it to the side. Then you order another one, stir, move, third one, you finally take a sip." She shrugged. "I'm a nurse. I notice things." He looked at his coffee, stirred it, moved it to the side. "You're doing it right now," she said. Something happened to his face. Not a smile. Peter Strahm didn't smile, but a crack. A small, involuntary fissure in the composure that he wore like armor. He looked down at the cup, then at her, and for half a second he looked like someone who'd just been seen for the first time. "I didn't know I did that," he said quietly. "I know." The waiter came back. More water. The music changed. Something acoustic, vaguely familiar. Peter ordered a third coffee. It was on the walk back to the tea station, the cold biting through her coat, the baby kicking for the first time that week, that Lindsey felt it. Not affection, not trust. Something smaller. The beginning of a recognition that this man, this stranger who shared her blood and nothing else, was just as lost as she was. He just had nicer shoes. Tracy Rigg found out on a Monday. She found out the way Tracy found out everything, through channels. A board member who'd heard from the estate lawyer's paralegal who'd mentioned it to his wife at a dinner party in Brookline. The information traveled the way it always did in those circles, quiet, fast, and lethal. Tracy called Peter at 9 p.m. He was in his father's study, which is where he always was at 9 p.m. "Tell me it's not true," she said. Peter closed his eyes, leaned back in the chair. The leather creaked. "It's verified, Mom. The DNA is... I don't care about DNA." Her voice was ice, not the dramatic movie kind, the real kind, the kind that burns. "I care about what you're going to do about it." She has rights, legal ones. She has nothing. Her mother took the money and signed an agreement. That was the end of it. Peter opened his eyes. "What money?" "Silence. The kind you can hear." "Mom, what money?" Tracy hung up. She didn't call back that night, or the next. But 2 weeks later, an investigator's report landed on Peter's desk. Not from his lawyers, not from anyone he'd hired. From Tracy. Hand-delivered by a courier in a grey envelope with no return address. Inside, bank statements, monthly deposits, 15 years' worth. From a trust account controlled by Tracy, routed through a law firm that no longer existed, to an account in the name of Alison Kerry, Lindsey's mother. A silence agreement, signed when Lindsey was an infant. The terms were simple. Take the money, keep the child away, never contact the Kramer family. Alison Kerry had taken the money, every month for 15 years until the cancer killed her and the payments stopped. Tracy had included a sticky note on the front page, her handwriting neat and sharp. "Now you know what kind of woman she was, and what kind her daughter is." Peter read the documents 3 times, and then he did something he'd regret for the rest of his life. The meeting was on a Wednesday. The lawyer's office, 14th floor, same conference table. Lindsey arrived first. She always did. She was wearing the nicer sweater, the one she saved for these meetings, and she'd done something different with her hair. Small things. The kind of effort you make when you're starting to believe you might actually belong somewhere. Peter walked in 12 minutes late. No apology, no eye contact. He sat down across from her and placed Tracy's dossier on the table, the bank statements, the silence agreement, all of it, and slid it across the mahogany like he was serving papers. "What is this?" Lindsey asked. "Your mother's records. She was paid monthly for 15 years to keep you away from my family." Lindsey looked at the papers. Her face didn't change, not yet, but her hand moved to the edge of the table and gripped it. "She signed an agreement, Lindsey. She took the money every month." Peter's voice was flat, corporate. The voice he used in board meetings when he was cutting a department and didn't want anyone to see it cost him anything. "Whatever you think this is, whatever you think we're building here, it started with a transaction. Your mother sold her silence. And now you show up pregnant, no job, and suddenly you're a Kramer? He straightened the papers on the table. "I'm not saying you planned this. I'm saying the pattern is there." The room went still. The attorney looked at the table. His associate looked at the window. Nobody moved. Lindsey's grip on the table edge tightened until her knuckles went white. She didn't blink, didn't raise her voice. When she spoke, each word landed like a stone dropped into water. "My mother was a receptionist making $11 an hour. She had a baby. No husband, no family, and a man with enough money to bury her in court if she ever opened her mouth. So yeah, she took the money, because the alternative was losing me." She stood up, slowly. The chair scraped against the hardwood. "You want to know the difference between your mother and mine, Peter? Mine did what she had to do to keep her daughter. Yours did what she had to do to erase one." She picked up her coat, put it on, zipped it over the belly that was now unmistakably there. 5 months. A boy she'd learn about next week at the ultrasound she'd attend alone. Peter didn't look up. He was staring at the bank statements, and for a split second, just a flash gone before it fully formed, something crossed his face that might have been doubt. But he didn't say anything. Didn't stop her. Let her walk out of the conference room, past the secretary who pretended not to notice, past the elevators that took too long, and out onto State Street where the wind off the harbor was sharp enough to make her eyes water. Or maybe it wasn't the wind. Lindsey walked 6 blocks before she stopped. She was standing in front of a CVS on Atlantic Avenue, and she didn't know why she'd stopped or where she was going. Her hands were shaking. Her jaw was locked so tight her teeth ached. She stood there for a long time, people streaming past her on the sidewalk, and she pressed both hands against her stomach and whispered to the baby, to nobody and to herself, "We're okay, we're okay. We don't need him." She almost believed it. Peter sat at his father's desk that night and read Tracy's documents again. The bank statements, the agreement, the sticky note in his mother's handwriting. But something wasn't sitting right. A feeling he couldn't name, like hearing a note played slightly out of tune and not being able to tell which instrument was wrong. He'd done what Tracy wanted. He'd pushed Lindsey away. He'd protected the name, the legacy, the story. So why did the victory feel like swallowing glass? He opened the bottom drawer, the one he'd never opened, the one that had been locked since his father died, and found a key taped to the underside of the drawer frame. The key opened a small safe behind the bookshelf. Inside the safe, letters, a dozen of them, handwritten. From Alison Carey to John Kramer. The room smelled like dust and old paper. Peter sat on the floor with his back against the desk and started reading. The letters weren't what Tracy said they were. "I need to stop here and say something. Because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking Tracy is the villain, and honestly, I thought so too the first time I heard this story. But here's the thing nobody wants to talk about. Tracy wasn't born cruel. She was made that way. 40 years of protecting a lie will do that to a person. 40 years of smiling at dinner parties while knowing your husband loved someone else. That kind of pain doesn't just go away. It calcifies. It turns into armor. And sometimes, the people wearing the thickest armor are the ones who got hurt the worst. Doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains it, and I think that matters. The first letter was dated March 1988. The paper was thin, the kind you'd buy in bulk from a drugstore, and the handwriting was careful, deliberate, with small rounded letters that leaned slightly to the right. Alison Carey wrote the way she'd probably done everything, precisely, without fuss, without wasted space. "John, I know you won't write back, that's fine. I'm not writing for an answer. I'm writing because she smiled today. A real one. She has your eyes. I thought you should know." Peter sat on the floor of his father's study with 12 letters spread across the hardwood. The house was silent, midnight silent, the kind where you can hear the building breathe. No traffic, no sirens, just the occasional creak of old walls settling and the distant hum of someone's kitchen appliance through the shared wall. His tie was loosened. His sleeves were rolled up. There was a coffee stain on his left cuff he hadn't noticed. The letters spanned 14 years. They weren't love letters, not exactly. They were something harder to categorize, updates, reports, small precise dispatches from a woman raising a child alone on a receptionist's salary in Dorchester, writing to a man who had built hospitals and married someone else, and never once came to see the daughter he'd left behind. She started school today, cried for 10 minutes, then stopped. I think she decided crying wasn't going to help. She's already like that, not practical. Gets it from you, I think, not from me. Peter read that one twice. His throat felt tight, and he swallowed against it. The money comes every month. I know what it means. I know what I signed. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't help, it does. But I want you to know I would have kept her anyway, with or without it. She's not something I agreed to in exchange for a check. She's my daughter. The heating system kicked on. The radiator in the hallway clanked. That same metallic heartbeat that had been the soundtrack of Peter's nights in this house since he was a kid. He ignored it. He read. She asked about her father today, first time. I told her he was gone. She said, "Like dead?" And I said, "Like gone." She didn't ask again. She's 11. She should be asking, I should be answering. But I don't have anything to give her that isn't going to break something. Peter put that letter down and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. The hardwood was cold under him. He could feel it through his pants, through the expensive fabric that suddenly felt like nothing at all. The last letter, the one at the bottom, dated 3 weeks before Alison Kerry died. I know I'm not going to tell her. I've thought about it every day for 14 years, and every day I find a reason not to. She's happy. She's tough. She doesn't need a man who chose not to be there showing up in her life like a plot twist. But she deserved to know. She deserved the truth. And I couldn't give it to her. That's my failure, John, not yours. Mine. Take care of yourself, or don't. You always did whatever you wanted anyway. Peter read the last line and set the letter on the floor next to the others. His hands were still. His breathing was even. But something inside him, something he'd been holding in place since the day his mother told him about the affair, since the funeral, since the champagne he never drank, shifted. Not broke. Shifted. Like a wall that had been leaning for 13 years, and finally, quietly, without drama or noise, fell. He sat on that floor until 3 in the morning. Then he got up, put the letters back in the safe, locked it and stood in the dark study for a long time looking at the family photo on the desk. Peter called Tracy the next morning. "I found the letters." Silence, then, "What letters?" "Dad's safe, behind the bookshelf. Alison Kerry's letters, all of them." More silence. Peter could hear Tracy breathing, measured, controlled, the way she did everything. "Those letters don't change anything, Peter. They change everything. If you recognize that woman, if you bring her into this family, I will go to the press. I will tell every outlet in this city what your father did. I will drag this hospital through a scandal it won't survive, and I will have you removed from the board." Peter looked out the window. Morning light on cobblestone, the street still wet from last night's rain. A dog walker passed with 3 leashes tangled together. Somewhere a delivery truck was backing up, the beeping steady and mechanical. "She has a name, Mum. Lindsey. She's a nurse. She's pregnant. And she's Dad's daughter. She's a liability. She's my sister." Tracy hung up. The line went dead. Peter stood at the window holding his phone, the screen dimming, then going black. He left the house 20 minutes later. Didn't tell his assistant. Didn't check his calendar, drove his car, the black Audi he barely used because he usually had a driver, down Beacon Street, through Back Bay, past the hospital, across the bridge, into neighborhoods where the buildings got shorter and the streets got rougher. And the parking was always impossible. Dorchester, Adams Street. Her building was a 3-story brick walk-up with a front door that didn't lock properly and a hallway that smelled like laundry detergent and boiled cabbage from the first-floor apartment. He climbed to the 3rd floor. The stairs creaked under his shoes that cost more than the monthly rent here, and he was suddenly painfully aware of that. He knocked. Lindsey opened the door in a Red Sox t-shirt, the belly now unmistakably there at 5 months, her hair damp from a shower. She looked at him. No suit, no tie, no briefcase, his face doing something she hadn't seen before, and didn't say a word. Just leaned against the doorframe and waited, the way she always did, like she'd been waiting her whole life for people to get to the point. Peter held out a manila envelope. Not the DNA report, not legal documents. "These are your mother's letters," he said. His voice broke on the word mother. He cleared his throat, but it didn't help. "She wrote them to our father. He kept them, in a safe in his study. My mother didn't want you to have them, but they're not hers, they're yours. Lindsey took the envelope. Her hands were wet, shower, not tears. She opened the clasp, pulled out the first letter, and started reading right there in the doorway. The hallway was cold. A draft from a window somebody had left, cracked on the first floor, carried the smell of snow and exhaust and the faint tang of a gas heater working too hard. Peter stood in the corridor. He could hear a TV through someone's wall, a game show, the audience clapping, a baby crying 2 floors down. The building's plumbing groaned. Lindsey read the letters one by one. She didn't sit down. She didn't invite him in. She stood in that doorway and read her mother's handwriting for the first time since she was 14 years old. And when she got to the last letter, the one about not having the courage to tell the truth, she pressed her forehead against the doorframe and closed her eyes. "I didn't know," Peter said. "I didn't know about any of it. Not until Morgan called me. And when I found out, I handled it wrong. I handled everything wrong." He swallowed. "What I said to you in that conference room, about your mother, about the money, about you not being a real Kramer, I was repeating my mother's words, and I didn't even realize it until I read your mother's letters." His voice cracked on the edge of the sentence. "I'm sorry for all of it." She opened her eyes, looked at him. The look wasn't forgiveness. It was too early for that, and she wasn't the type to hand it out for free. But it wasn't hostility either. It was something in between. Assessment. The careful, clinical gaze of a nurse deciding whether a patient was stable enough to move. "Come in," she said. Not warmly. More like, "It's freezing and you look terrible." He came in, sat at the kitchen table, formica top, one leg slightly shorter than the others, a salt shaker and a jar of peanut butter left from breakfast. She made coffee, instant, the cheap kind that came in a red canister and tasted like it had been on the shelf since the last presidential election. Peter drank it without complaint. It might have been the best cup of coffee he'd ever had. They talked, not about money, not about the estate, about Alison Kerry, the woman he never met and she'd lost too young, about John Kramer, the father they'd shared and neither one had really known, about Tracy and the way fear makes people cruel, about what happens when you spend your whole life building walls and then someone shows up with a key you didn't know existed. It wasn't a reconciliation. Not yet. It was something smaller and messier, and more honest than that. 2 strangers sitting at a wobbly kitchen table in a cold apartment in Dorchester, drinking bad coffee and figuring out how to be related to each other. When Peter left, past midnight, the snow coming down thick, his shoes ruined from the slush on Adams Street, Lindsey stood in the doorway. "You can come back," she said. "If you want." He nodded, didn't say anything. Turned and walked down the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Lindsey closed the door, locked it, stood in her kitchen holding the letters against her chest. The radiator kicked on, hissing. "You know what I keep coming back to? The letters. Not the DNA, not the money, not the lawyers. The letters. Because Alison Kerry wrote to a man for 14 years, knowing he'd never write back. She kept writing anyway. And John Kramer, the man who built hospitals, who saved thousands of lives, who shook hands with senators, he couldn't pick up a pen and write back to the mother of his own child. But he kept every single letter, locked them in a safe, couldn't let go, couldn't hold on. If that's not the most human thing you've ever heard, I don't know what is." Peter called the emergency board meeting on a Thursday, gave 24 hours notice, which was technically insufficient per the bylaws, but nobody objected. When the CEO requests an emergency session, you show up. The boardroom at Strahm Health Group's headquarters was on the top floor of a glass building on Congress Street, a room designed to make people feel small. Long table, 16 chairs, a wall of windows facing the harbor. The coffee was good, real coffee, not the canister stuff, and someone had set out pastries on a tray that nobody would eat, because eating in a boardroom felt like admitting you were human. Peter stood at the head of the table. No notes, no slides, no legal counsel beside him. Art Blank was there, but sitting in the gallery, not at the table. Peter had told him he wanted to do this alone. 12 board members. 3 were over 70 and had served with his father. 2 were hospital administrators. The rest were finance people. the kind who measured everything in quarters and projections. They were all looking at him the way board members look at a CEO who's called an emergency meeting with no agenda, with polite, expensive dread. "I'll keep this short," Peter said. He didn't sit down. 3 months ago, the genetics lab at St. Clair flagged a DNA match in our cardiac research database. The match was between a former employee, a nurse named Lindsey Perez, and the profile of our founder, John Kramer, my father. Nobody moved. The harbor outside was grey and flat. Lindsey Perez is my half-sister. She's the biological daughter of John Kramer and a woman named Alison Kerry, who worked as a receptionist at one of our clinics in the late 1980s. Ms. Kerry is deceased. My father never publicly acknowledged the relationship. My mother," he paused, and the pause had weight, "was aware of it and took steps to ensure it remained hidden." He opened a folder, placed copies of the DNA report on the table, along with a letter from Art Blank confirming the estate claim. "I'm requesting formal recognition of Lindsey Perez as a legal heir to the Kramer estate and a beneficiary of the family trust. I'm also requesting that the board approve her reinstatement at St. Clair Memorial in a position of her choosing, should she want it." Silence, the kind that fills a room like water. Robert Henley, oldest board member, 82, had golfed with John Kramer at Brookline Country Club for 30 years, leaned forward. "Peter, does your mother know you're doing this?" "She does." "And?" "She's opposed." Henley nodded slowly. "She called me last night, told me she'd go to the Globe if this went through. I'm aware. Are you prepared for that?" Peter looked at the harbor. A ferry was crossing toward the islands, leaving a white wake on the grey water. A seagull landed on the window ledge outside, looked in, and flew away. "My father built this company on the idea that everybody deserves access to care." That was his line. He said it at every fundraiser, every dedication, every ribbon cutting. Everybody deserves access. He meant patience. But I think if he'd been braver, if he'd been a better man, and he would have meant his daughter too. He buttoned his jacket. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing the board of my decision. If you want my resignation, you can have it. But Lindsey Perez is a Kramer, and it's about time somebody said it out loud." The room was still. The coffee went cold in 12 cups. Henley looked around the table, then back at Peter. "Your father would have hated this," he said. "The mess, the publicity." He took off his glasses, cleaned them with his tie. But he would have known it was right. The vote was 9-3. Peter stayed. Tracy went to the press the following Monday. The Boston Globe ran it on Tuesday, front of the Metro section above the fold. Hospital CEO reveals secret half-sister, the nurse he fired. The headline was designed to sell papers, and it did. The story was everywhere within 48 hours. Local news, national outlets, the kind of Twitter discourse where everybody has an opinion and nobody has all the facts. For 3 weeks, Peter's name was inseparable from the word scandal. His inbox was a disaster. His PR team worked 18-hour days. 2 donors pulled their pledges. An editorial in the Herald called him reckless. A segment on a cable news morning show debated whether he should step down. But something else happened, something Tracy hadn't planned for. People read about Lindsey. Not just the headline, the story, the girl from Dorchester, the nurse who held dying patients' hands, the woman who worked double shifts and ate cold ramen in break rooms and never once complained, the pregnant woman who'd been let go by a brother who didn't know she existed. And they saw themselves. Not in the wealth, not in the scandal, in the struggle. In the quiet, grinding, unglamorous work of surviving when the world keeps telling you that you don't matter. The letters to the editor shifted. The comments turned. A nurse at Mass General started a petition. A women's advocacy group in Cambridge issued a statement. By the end of the 3rd week, the narrative had flipped, and Tracy Rigg, sitting in her new apartment in Palm Beach with the ocean view she'd bought to prove she didn't need Boston, realized she'd lost control of a story she thought she owned. She stopped calling Peter, stopped calling anyone. The silence from Florida was louder than anything she could have said. Eric Matthews came back in April. Lindsey was 6 months along, big enough now that everything was uncomfortable, sitting, standing, sleeping, breathing. She was at the clinic in Roxbury, charting at the nurse's station when her phone buzzed. A text from a number she'd deleted but still recognized. "I heard about everything. Can we talk?" She stared at it for a long time. The fluorescent light above her flickered. The vending machine hummed. A patient in the waiting room coughed. She typed back, "No." He called. She didn't answer. He called again. She picked up on the third ring because the receptionist was giving her a look. "Lindsey, I know I messed up. I know the timing. Eric, stop. Just hear me out." I said, "Stop." Her voice was calm. Not angry calm. The other kind. The kind that comes after anger has already burned through and left nothing but clarity. "You left me by text message. 4 years. And you couldn't even do it in person. And now that there's money involved, now that the Kramer name is attached, now you want to talk?" Silence on the other end. The receptionist was definitely listening now. "I'm having this baby alone," Lindsey said. "By choice. And that choice doesn't include you." She hung up, set the phone face down on the desk. Her hands were shaking, but only a little. The receptionist, Gladys, 64, had been working that desk since before Lindsey was born, looked at her over the top of her glasses. "Good for you, honey." Lindsey didn't respond. She picked up her pen and went back to charting, but her hand was steadier now. "Can I be honest with you for a second? That phone call with Eric, that was the moment I knew Lindsey was going to be okay, not because she was strong. She'd always been strong, but because for the first time, she wasn't being strong out of survival. She was being strong out of choice. There's a difference. Survival strength is just holding on. Choice strength is knowing you deserve better, and finally acting like it. It took her 30 years to get there, but she got there. Epilogue. July. The baby came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks early, which the OB said was normal for first pregnancies, and Lindsey said was just like his mother, never on time for anything. She went into labor at 4 in the morning in her Dorchester apartment, called a cab because the tea wasn't running yet, and arrived at St. Clair Memorial, her hospital, the one that had fired her and then, in the strangest turn of events she could have imagined, given her back something she never knew she was missing. At 4:47 a.m. Peter was there by 6. He'd been asleep when she called. Actually asleep, for once. Not sitting in his father's study. And he'd driven from Beacon Hill in sweatpants and a wrinkled Harvard t-shirt he'd had since college. He hadn't shaved. His hair was sticking up on one side. He looked, for the first time since Lindsey had known him, like a regular person who'd been woken up too early and hadn't had coffee yet. He sat in the hallway. Plastic chair. The same kind of chairs that were in every hospital corridor in America. Orange, uncomfortable, designed by someone who had never waited for anything. He bought a coffee from the vending machine. It was terrible. He drank it anyway. Bought another one. Let it go cold. The nurses walked past him all morning. Some recognized him. The CEO here in sweatpants at 6 a.m. with vending machine coffee. A few nodded. One smiled. He nodded back and tried not to look like he was going to throw up from nerves. At 11:23 a.m., a nurse came out. Young, tired, scrubs spotted with something Peter decided not to identify. "Mom and baby are doing great. It's a boy." Peter stood up. His knees cracked. The cold coffee sloshed in the cup he was still holding. "Can I give her a few minutes? I'll come get you." He waited. 12 more minutes, counted every one. The room was small, standard issue, adjustable bed, monitors beeping softly, the blinds half open, letting in a stripe of July sunlight that fell across the floor like a line drawn in gold. The air smelled like antiseptic and something else, something warm and new and impossible to name. Lindsey was propped up against pillows, her hair plastered to her forehead, her face pale and blotchy and exhausted and alive. The baby was on her chest, tiny, red-faced, wrapped in a hospital blanket with blue stripes. His eyes were closed. His fists were clenched. He was the smallest, most complete thing Peter had ever seen. "Hey," Lindsey said. Her voice was wrecked, hoarse, beautiful. "Hey." Peter stood in the doorway. His hands were in his pockets because he didn't know what else to do with them. "You okay?" I just pushed a human being out of my body, Peter. I'm spectacular. She laughed, then winced. Don't make me laugh. Everything hurts. He walked closer, slowly, like the baby might startle. Like he might startle. Wanna hold him? Peter looked at the baby, at Lindsey, at the monitors, the IV line, the water pitcher on the bedside table with a bendy straw. The normality of it. The staggering, mundane, earth-shattering normality. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I do. She handed the baby over. Peter took him with both hands. Carefully, so carefully, the way you hold something that could break the world if you dropped it. The baby was warm. Lighter than he expected. 7 pounds maybe of absolute everything. His name is John, Lindsey said. Peter looked up. Not Kramer, not Strahm, just John. She adjusted the pillow behind her back, wincing. For the man who made both of us possible, even if he got most of it wrong. Peter looked down at the baby, John, his nephew, the grandson of a man who'd built hospitals and kept secrets, and loved a woman he never had the courage to claim. The son of a nurse from Dorchester, who'd been thrown out of this building with a cardboard box, and came back through a door she didn't know existed. The baby opened his eyes, unfocused newborn blue. He blinked at the ceiling, at the light, at whatever newborns see when the world is still a blur of shapes and sounds. He's got his grandfather's nose, Lindsey said. Then, quieter, looking at Peter. Our father's nose. Peter didn't answer. He stood there, holding the baby in a room that smelled like hospital in July and beginning, and he let the weight of it, all of it, the grief and the guilt and the wasted years and the letters and the lies and the impossible, stupid, painful miracle of being someone's family, settle into his chest like something that had been looking for a place to land. Outside the window, Boston was doing its thing. Traffic on Storrow Drive, the Charles River flat and silver in the heat. Somewhere, a siren. Somewhere, a church bell. The ordinary, relentless machinery of a city that doesn't stop for anyone's story. It wasn't perfect after that. It was never going to be. Tracy stayed in Florida. She sent a card when the baby was born. No note inside, just her name on the signature line. Peter put it on the fridge in his Beacon Hill penthouse and looked at it every morning while he made coffee. He didn't call her. She didn't call him. The distance between Boston and Palm Beach was measured in more than miles. The board stabilized. The donors came back, most of them. One of the hospitals was renamed, the Allison Kerry Cardiac Research Wing. Peter's idea. Lindsey cried when she saw the sign. She denied it later, but Peter saw it, and he didn't say anything, which was the right call. Lindsey went back to nursing. Not at St. Clair, she chose the clinic in Roxbury, the one with the broken vending machine and the flickering fluorescent. She said it felt more like home. Peter offered to fund renovations. She said she'd think about it. She thought about it for 3 months and then said yes, but only if they fixed the parking lot first, because she'd blown a tire twice. The brothers, half-siblings, learned how to be family the way most people do. Badly, slowly, with setbacks and silences and meals where nobody talked and meals where everybody talked too much. Sunday dinners became a thing. Lindsey's apartment, because it was smaller and warmer and didn't make her feel like she was visiting a museum. Peter brought wine. Lindsey made pasta from a box. Baby John sat in a bouncer on the kitchen floor and grabbed at everything within reach. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were arguments about the estate, about boundaries, about Peter's tendency to try to fix things with money and Lindsey's tendency to refuse help out of pride. There were weeks when they didn't talk. There were weeks when they talked every day. But there was this. On a Sunday in October, the first one where the air finally smelled like fall, Peter showed up at Lindsey's apartment with a bag from the Italian deli on Ave. Lindsey opened the door with John on her hip. The baby was 3 months old, already grabbing at earrings and ponytails and anything shiny. Peter took him without being asked, held him while Lindsey unpacked the food. The 3 of them sat at the kitchen table, the wobbly one with the short leg, and ate meatball subs and didn't talk about the past. The radiator kicked on. The baby spit up on Peter's shirt. The nice one, the one that cost more than Lindsey's rent. Peter looked down at the stain, then at Lindsey, then at the baby who was already reaching for his watch. "This is a $400 shirt," he said. "Was," Lindsey said. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. And you. What would you do if a single piece of paper could change everything you thought you knew about yourself? What would you do if the family you always wanted turned out to be the one person you least expected? Let me know in the comments.